Welcome back to another edition of the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. My name is Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. As always, I'm joined by Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for BrownZone.com, the Chronicle, Telegram, and the Medina Gazette. Scott, great to see you as always, and, well, not the result I think any of us were looking for. The Browns fall 31-3. On a very big stage on Monday Night Football. And, Scott, before we get to your major takeaways, just kind of curious as to the things you were hearing about this game going in. I know last week when we spoke, I mean, you were very clear in stating that this was going to be a huge challenge for the Browns, playing a team that certainly hadn't played the best of competition prior to their bye week, but I heard a lot of Browns fans tell me this week that they expect the Browns to win because this is the kind of environment where they really felt like this team needed to show its stuff, and they very clearly did not do that last night.
No, they did not. And it was interesting because, to me, predictions were all over the board. You know, even watching the ESPN pregame, there was, I think Louis Riddick had the Niners killing the Browns. And then a lot of the Browns, my coworkers, my peer Browns beat writers, most of them had the Browns winning. And I was torn. I went back and forth. I had the Niners, and then I started to change because Jarvis Landry cleared protocol and Callaway's back, and I kind of liked the vibe in the locker room during the week. But I wound up sticking with the Niners, but in a close game. I figured the Browns could do something offensively. The Niners obviously have a dominant defensive line, or have a talented defensive line that dominated Monday night. But their secondary is susceptible. They had injury there. It felt like the Browns should have been able to come up with a plan that let them score some points, and therefore I thought it would be a really good game. I knew the 49ers would score because Kyle Shanahan, their coach, is so good, and he has that scheme, and he had an extra week with the bye to prepare. But my point is, I thought it was going to be a really good game. And the fact that the Browns went out there and played as poorly as they did and looked as unprepared as they did and were out physical and all the things we can talk about is stunning, and what makes it worse is that it came after that Baltimore win. That felt like a turning point in the season. And not that it still can't be. I mean, we could look back 10 weeks from now and go, hey, at least that was the start of it. But to play such a poor game right after that win over the Ravens, it just makes you question everything you thought you knew after that Ravens win.
A lot to get into today. We will, of course, discuss the 31-3 loss. We'll get into which loss was worse, this one or the opener. Baker Mayfield obviously dealing with a great deal of criticism right now. His numbers were pretty bad last night. We'll talk about the offensive line and their struggles. Wonder why OBJ was fielding punts there at the end of the game, and then we'll turn our attention to the Seattle Seahawks this coming Sunday before the bye week. So, Scott, will begin with your three major takeaways from the loss.
Well, let's go with Baker. Has not been the player we all expected him to be in year two. And you and I were talking about this before we came on. I was playing golf with my best friend, best man at my wedding, right before the season. And he said he couldn't imagine a scenario in which Baker didn't improve in year two. And I said, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? There's no, like, he wasn't having any of it. Well, I know we're only 5 games in, but that's a pretty good chunk of an NFL season, and he hasn't gotten better. And you can make all the excuses you want for him. The line, Freddie Kitchens is a play caller, whatever. Baker's not playing as well as he did as a rookie, and that was never more obvious than last night. Right? 8 for 22, I think, 13.4 rating, 2 more interceptions, even though one of them wasn't his fault. Fumbled twice, lost one. To me, the overriding thing about Baker is he just doesn't look comfortable in the pocket. And you can blame some of that on the O-line, but I think it's unfair to blame all of it on the O-line. And until Baker gets better, and if he plays like he did against Baltimore, they'll be fine. But they also had a running game that worked. And, there are a bunch of other factors that went into it. Baker needs to get better, and obviously the target's on his back. Nick Bosa went after him and did the flag plant because of what Baker had done at Oklahoma. Richard Sherman said he was extra motivated because Baker wouldn't shake his hand before the game, which doesn't make any sense. So I just don't like where Baker is right now, and he's got to figure it out in a hurry. So that's takeaway number one, because if he doesn't play like a top 15 quarterback, this team's not doing anything this year. Number 2 is Freddie talked all training camp, Freddie Kitchens, about how physical this team was going to be. And he had a physical camp, and that was supposed to manifest itself during the season. And he felt like they went into Baltimore and were the more physical team against the Ravens team known to be physical. Well, then I go out to San Francisco, a team that's never had a reputation for being a physical, tough team, and they just got manhandled. And it started on play 1, where the linebackers go to the left, get out of their gaps. Breida goes for 83 yards, and it never stopped. I thought they got beat up front. The defensive line, which is supposed to be the strength of this team, was far from dominant, didn't hold its own, and they allowed 275 yards rushing. And it's not all scheme. A lot of that is effort. And I think the Browns did not have consistent effort through 4 quarters. I think that was obvious. I think even in the third quarter, when the game was still, quote-unquote, within reach, right? They could have made a run early in the third quarter. There were 2 plays on third down where tight end George Kittle catches the ball short of the first down marker. The Browns can't bring him down. I know he's a good player. I know he's a big guy. To me, that showed that they were out-physicaled. And that's disappointing. And if it's going to be one of your staples, if that's part of your core identity, it can't happen. And it can't happen in a big game on Monday night in front of national TV. So there's 2. And then my third takeaway, let's talk about OBJ. I don't blame – I'm blaming OBJ for the fumble. There's no question about that. He was carrying the ball out away from him, trying to do too much, whatever. But it's mind-boggling to me that they can't figure out a way. And by they, Freddie Kitchens, Ryan Lindley, Todd Monken, all the coaching staff, Baker Mayfield, can't figure out a way to get this guy the ball more than 2 receptions a game for the last 2 weeks. It's not like he's never been double-teamed before. He was double-teamed throughout his career in New York, and he never had less than 3 catches. I think one time in his career he had less than 3 catches, and now he's got back-to-back 2 catches. The best receivers in the league get double-teamed, and they're still the best receivers in the league. DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones. I mean, we know the list. Antonio Brown when he was playing. And for Odell not to have that production for 2 straight weeks is troubling, and it's a trend because he hasn't had a breakout game. He had the run long, catch and run against the Jets, but we just haven't seen it, and it has to get better. You don't trade for a guy, give up what you gave, pay him what you're paying him, not to have him be a bigger part of your offense. So they just have to figure that out. So there's so many takeaways, but let's start with those 3.
And let's stick with Baker Mayfield for just a moment here, too, because he's certainly come under fire. And look, he completed 8 passes in that Monday night loss. So it's really difficult, I think, for us to sit here and sidestep the criticism of him. And, last night, one of your tweets that got a great deal of action was the tweet that detailed the numbers posted by Baker Mayfield. And that was really all it was. You put the numbers out there, and people immediately jumped on it. 2 of my major takeaways from that is, number 1, as passionate as this fan base is, well, they could turn on you in a hurry. And, I'm not necessarily sure that they're jumping off the bandwagon, but, I think they're getting to that point, Scott, where people are starting to think, look, we were behind this guy last year because he showed us a lot, but we're beginning to wonder now, where in the world did the guy we saw last year go?
Yeah, and I'll start with the fans. It's interesting, and I watched the Freddie Kitchens and Baker Mayfield news conferences on the Periscope app, right, that the Browns have. And you can see the comments. And I never do it, but I was trying to see what they were saying. So I'm watching on the Periscope app. And, people calling Baker Johnny 2.0. And it's just interesting to see how fans, and to me it's more of a instant reaction. Like, they're so upset. They got so excited for the game. They're so frustrated. That's how it comes out. I don't really believe most Browns fans think that. I don't think most Browns fans want to give up on him, any of that. But it just reminds you of the passion and how invested fans are in each and every game. Having said that, I wish I had a better explanation for why he's struggling the way he is. And part of it is the offense, right? It's not the same Todd Haley offense that Freddie Kitchens just tweaked at the end of last year. And that seemed to fit Baker perfectly. Now, I do think there's longer routes. So he's holding the ball a little more, and he's looking deeper, and maybe that's not exactly the best way for Baker to play. Although he has that arm strength, but maybe we saw it at Oklahoma, get the ball out of your hands quick, make quick decisions. It feels like that's what he's best at. Now, I don't know if you can always have your offense tailored to that, right? You got to stand in the pocket and throw the ball deep sometimes. But it certainly feels like the Freddie Kitchens, Todd Monken combination is still trying to figure things out. And it looked like they had it for a week in Baltimore, and they weren't able to replicate that. But on top of that, there's no doubt in my mind that defensive coordinators have adjusted to Baker, right? They spent all offseason watching film of his, 13 starts last season, and said, okay, this is how we need to defend him. And I believe part of that is making him stay in the pocket and trying to make him beat you from in there with a whole bunch of big bodies around him. We saw the Chargers do it last year, and they had a lot of success against Baker, but nobody else was able to do it. And not that he didn't win out of the pocket last year, but he would win by sliding slightly, or he would step up into a hole and make a throw, or he would get out to his right and make a throw. Like, that's when it seems the biggest plays came from, and he's just not been able to do that this year. Feels like he's bailing too early to his right, or when he bails, he runs right into a sack, or the linemen have the guy blocked because they think Baker's going to be somewhere, and all of a sudden he takes off, and now there's no choice but Nick Bosa's going to run him down. And he's not an elite athlete, so he doesn't run away from many people. Like, there's just a lot of different things to point to, and I'm surprised. What I'm most surprised about is that he doesn't look as comfortable inside the pocket. And that's what impressed me the most last year, is those subtle movements inside the pocket to find that throwing lane, to create that extra half a second of time to get off a throw. He was able to do, and I think that's an innate skill, and I don't know where it's gone. And I think it's too simple to say, well, he doesn't trust the offensive line or the protection is not good enough, because I don't think the line's been as bad as people think it is. It's obvious that Greg Robinson is not an elite left tackle, right? If he goes one-on-one with Nick Bosa is going to win a bunch of times. So the Browns coaches need to do a better job of helping him out. But Baker also isn't helping. It feels like he doesn't need to hold on to the ball as long as he is, and then he does. And when there is time, he doesn't trust there to be time, so he looks to bail, and then he runs into sacks. Like, it's an all-encompassing thing, and I don't think you can remove blame from Baker for the protection issues.
Now, when you take a look at what went on yesterday, I think there's a number of different things you can dissect here, but we're all kind of wondering, for those who are still tuned in the fourth quarter, I think we were all kind of wondering, why in the world was Odell Beckham Jr. fielding punts at the end of that game? Now, you mentioned something to me before we came on that made a little bit more sense, and I want to give you a chance to explain that. But to me, when you're down by that much, sometimes you just take your medicine and you move on.
Right.
As a fan, you watch that, you think to yourself, oh my God, why is this guy out there fielding punts? Because you immediately fear the worst.
Certainly. And it's certainly inconsistent for Freddie Kitchens to remove Baker Mayfield with 5 minutes left, I think. And usually Freddie has left Baker out there to take hits. And, I mean, week one he finished every snap, and they got beat by 30. So he obviously saw Baker taking a beating and got him out of there to save what he called any more unnecessary hits. So to put Odell back to return a kick 2 minutes before you're going to take Baker out, or I don't think Baker played again because obviously Odell fumbled, it just doesn't make sense. And I don't think Freddie is that, for lack of a better word, stupid. Like, I don't think Freddie made that move and said, hey, we're going to spark this team down 25 with 7 minutes left. No coach would do that. So I think Odell asked to return a punt. He's done it before. And Freddie said, yeah, go ahead. Or they relented, or Odell ran out there, and then Freddie said, that's fine, leave him out there. Whatever it is, there's no way that was Freddie's idea. Having said that, I think it's a terrible idea. I don't think it's a good idea from Odell. I think the Browns coaches should have stopped him from doing it, because all you're doing is giving Odell another chance to get hurt, and that's the next worst thing that could have happened in that game. So I thought it looked terrible. I thought it was a bad idea, and then Odell just made matters worse by running around and fumbling. But, and then Freddie, we just talk about things making stuff look worse. Then Freddie, after the game, says, we thought we'd give it a whirl. Like, this isn't life or death. It doesn't mean that Freddie's a bad coach. I just don't like the sound of that. Like, I prefer my head coach was, I guess, less flippant about something like that, which to me is a serious matter in the game. Giving it a whirl, down 25 in the fourth quarter, I just didn't like that answer.
Seemed like the towel had kind of been thrown in at that point. I think that's a fair way of phrasing it. Again, we've got you locked into the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast with Scott Petrak. All right, Scott, we got to bring this up because this has been talked about at least over the last few hours here. That opening day loss against the Tennessee Titans, it was a loss that was a gut punch felt by every Browns fan all across the greater Cleveland area and beyond because everybody was so hyped. You heard all this noise throughout the offseason about how great this team was supposed to be, and we know how bad they had been in openers, and then they kind of laid an egg. But what was worse, the opening day loss against the Tennessee Titans or what we saw last night, a game where it looked like they didn't even belong in the same field as the 49ers?
Yeah, this is the least fun kind of Browns conversation to have, right? Which is worse, and we've been having it forever. But I think it's applicable in this situation. I mean, they played 5 games, and they've been blown out twice. So to answer your question, I think the Monday night game against the Niners was worse because although I understand the excitement and anticipation going into week 1, which is something I'd never felt before in the however many years I've been covering this team, 16, I'd never felt that kind of anticipation for an opener and a game. Having said that, it was still the opener. There's still 15 games left. You could kind of rationalize it a little bit and say, well, they were in it until the fourth quarter, and Baker played fine until he threw 3 fourth-quarter touchdowns or interceptions. You kind of, I think, explain it a little bit, and you knew there were 15 games left, and there's a lot of time to recover. This one, coming off that Baltimore win, the way it happened, and the fact that it leaves you or me or people questioning where this team goes now, I think it's a more serious loss. I think the questions coming out of this game are more serious about Freddie Kitchens, about where Baker Mayfield is. So for that, I think this loss is worse. And there's only 11 games left, right? And they have Seattle, and they have New England. Like, it's – and this is a crazy league, and it's week to week, and we blow up everything. If they win, it's the best win ever. If they lose, it's the worst loss ever. Having said that, I do feel like we're in a crucial part of the season here because all you have to do is survive to get through that New England game. And then it gets easier, and you should be able to make a run. But survive means you probably got to win one of these next 2 games, and it's not going to be easy. And San Francisco is included in that group. All you have to do is go 1-2. Well, now you got to go 1-1, and to put them where I think they need to be. Not that they couldn't make a run if they were 2-5, but it becomes a lot harder. The questions get more difficult. So I just feel with what was at stake against San Francisco, where the Browns had come from with that Baltimore win, and just how thorough a beating it was, to me it's worse. And then I'll go back to the question about Baker, the question about Freddie, and the questions about a lack of physicality. You just don't know what you have in this team. And that's fine after 1 game. After 5 games, that's a little more startling and disturbing, unsettling.
The difficult thing about football, too, is that in most cases you have to wait about a week between games. And in this case, it's only 6 days for the Browns. But all is not lost. I mean, they're 1 game below 500, right? And they're still within striking distance of the Baltimore Ravens, who, as we mentioned, they, of course, beat last week on the road. But now they look ahead to the Seattle Seahawks. But that's a team that's playing extraordinarily well. And, the Browns have had a tough time playing at home this season too, which is odd, but that's the way it's gone down so far. So we take a look ahead to this Sunday against Seattle. And, I think the momentum from the victory over Baltimore was kind of squashed a bit based on what we saw on Monday night against the 49ers. But what are some keys to that game on Sunday against the Seahawks?
Well, from a big picture perspective, I would say the Browns, it's not a huge sample size, but they seem to play better when their backs are against the wall and they've been doubted. And people are going to doubt them all week. People are going to criticize Baker Mayfield and criticize Freddie Kitchens. And I don't think it's crazy to think that they come out with a renewed energy and get the win and quiet all this uproar, all these doubts that are so fresh in our minds because of this loss to San Francisco. So I do think that's possible. They still have to prove they can win at home, right? This is the best home field advantage they've had in years because people have been there the first couple of games and excited to be there. And I think that'll continue Sunday against Seattle. But eventually you got to win a home game, right? And you got to give these fans, you got to reward these fans for not only coming now in their excitement now, but for all the crap they put up to for all these years. They need to be rewarded. And I do think the Browns appreciate that. But when you look at Seattle, it starts with Russell Wilson, right? Elite quarterback in this league. Continues to prove that. And it does it from a 5 foot 10.5-inch body. And there's no way we can escape the comparisons from a size standpoint from Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield. And Russell Wilson has shown that you can win at that size. So does Drew Brees. But I always kind of didn't agree with the comparison between Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield when Baker was coming out in the draft because Russell is an elite athlete. And he's big and he's strong and he can bounce off tacklers and he can make guys miss, and in open space he's really good. And Baker's just an average athlete back there. And yes, he can make some plays out of the pocket, and that's good, and it keeps the defense on its toes, but you can't count on that. And Russell Wilson has made a living running away from people and making plays. So it starts there. He's really accurate. That throw that he made on Thursday night against the Rams, where he dropped it in the bucket in the back of the end zone, I think it was Tyler Lockett, I thought he's throwing the ball away, and it turns into a touchdown. So you can never give up on a play with him, and Baker's going to need to play much better than he has because Russell Wilson's going to play well, and they're going to score, and the Browns are going to have to keep up. I mentioned Lockett. He's a big-time receiver in this league. Carson, their running back, ran hard against the Rams on Thursday night. That's the first time I spent a lot of time watching him and was really impressed. He didn't get off to a great start and just kept pounding and wore down that Rams defense. I think you can get to the Seahawks defense a little bit. It's nowhere near what it was when they won that Super Bowl and went to back-to-back Super Bowls. But it's still good. It's still opportunistic. At least that's how it looked against the Rams. So it's definitely a challenge. I mean, they're 4-1, right? We know their pedigree. Pete Carroll's a good coach, right? I mean, we talk about matchups. Freddie Kitchens is the underdog in all these matchups because he keeps going against big-time coaches. That's not going away with Pete Carroll and then Bill Belichick in the next two games they play. So it's a tough game. I would not be surprised if the Browns bounce back and won. It feels like that kind of game. The Seahawks got to make the trip. But I'm saying that on a Tuesday. I need to see how the week goes. I need to see how Baker's psyche is. If Odell is okay after these last two games only getting 4 catches. I need to get a feel for this team before I'm ready to say they'll bounce back. But I wouldn't discount it. It feels like it could be one of those games.
One last thing before we get to the golf shot of the week. Last week, much was made about how the Niners were coming off a bye week. They had that extra time to get ready for the Browns. This week, the Browns have one less day to work with to get ready for the Seahawks. Yes, the Seahawks are making the trip, but you alluded to it. They played the Rams on Thursday Night Football, so that will give them a couple of extra days to get ready for the Browns. How much of that do you think plays into this as well?
Yeah, it's certainly a factor. I don't think you can discount it at all. I think if you're the Browns or a Browns fan, you hope that the extra days and the cross-country trip and the 1 o'clock start kind of cancel out each other, and it just becomes normal. But any coach given that extra time, let me rephrase, any good coach given that extra time usually capitalizes. You look at an Andy Reid, I think he won his first 15 games coming off a bye week. Kyle Shanahan, when people talked about, sometimes teams are rusty coming off a bye, and that's been known to happen. I had no doubt in my mind that Kyle Shanahan's team Monday night was going to be ready to play the Browns. The Browns are going to have to match their preparedness and their energy and effort, and they just didn't because Kyle Shanahan's that quality of a coach. And I bet he spent 2 weeks designing those plays that he knew would confuse the Browns and beat the Browns, and he did just that. So if you play a good coach, given the extra time, that gives them an advantage, and Pete Carroll's that kind of coach. We know that. And Freddie Kitchens then is at a disadvantage because he has one less day. He's a first-year coach, hasn't proven anything. So, in summation, the best coaches take advantage of that extra time, and that gives Pete Carroll the edge. And then we'll see what happens when the Browns get the extra week before they go to New England. Is an extra week enough to put Freddie on even ground with Bill Belichick? I'd have to argue no right now, and I'm not even sure that's a slight to Freddie Kitchens. It's more toward Bill Belichick. But, and it's easy to pick on these guys after a loss and after a bad loss, but Freddie just has not shown us enough. And just, we talked before the season. I'm sure you and I did. The two biggest questions on this team to me were Freddie Kitchens and Baker Mayfield. If Freddie Kitchens coached like he belonged and Baker Mayfield made a jump from year 1 to year 2, this team was going to be fine and go to the playoffs. We're 5 weeks in, and we don't know the answer to number 1, and the answer to number 2 has been no so far. So if this team's going to go to the playoffs, Freddie's going to have to coach better, and Baker's going to have to play better.
No question about that. I don't think you'd get any debate from anyone on that statement. All right, Scott, we've come to that point in the show where we get to talk about your golf game. Mother Nature decided to cooperate for the most part last week. We've finally got some nice, cool fall temperatures. What golf shot or golf shots were the best of yours, in your opinion?
Well, you're reading my mind. I'm going to give you 2 because I was able to play a couple times, and I feel like it. The first one, Ridgewood. I played Ridgewood in Parma over by my grandma's house. And the thing that makes this shot one of the golf shots of the week is I was playing with a guy, got paired up with them, and then we run into some other guys, and they had like 5 or 6 guys. So they were going to let us play through, and it's a short par 5, long par 4, however you want to call it, because at Ridgewood they listed it a 5, but it's not long enough to be a 5. But so everybody's watching. It's starting to rain a little bit, and I piped this drive with the little cut down the left side, right on the tree line, cut back into the fairway, left me with an 8-iron into this green, and hit it up to the front and got up and down for par. So just the drive, I played enough golf where it's not a big deal that you're teeing off in front of random people, but it does add that little bit, right? Man, you hope you don't hit a bad shot. Plus, you're playing through, so you got to hurry up. You don't want to duck hook it and be looking for your ball. So the fact that I hit the drive that I was trying to hit, because it's a little dogleg right, and I hit it just like I wanted, that was a memorable shot and probably the best shot I hit that day. And then I was able to get out to Creekwood, one of my favorite just, local tracks that I get out to. And I didn't play particularly well. And I hit a bunch of funky shots. But at number 12 at Creekwood, it's a tight par 3. It's probably playing about 165. I was just going to try to hit an easy 6-iron, maybe a little fade in there. And I didn't hit it great. Like, if you looked at my divot, it's aiming left, and I got it off the toe a little bit. But whatever, it was headed right at the flag the whole time. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, I'm going to hit a hole. I'm playing by myself. I'm like, I'm going to get a hole in one. There's nobody around. And it landed about 8 feet short and bounced up to about 2.5 feet. So even though it wasn't pure, it looked good. And if you're just watching, you would think that it was a really good shot. And anytime you can get a birdie, and there's actually back-to-back birdies in a bad round of golf, but I'll take it.
I would like to think that the most gratifying thing you could do on a par 3 when you're playing by yourself is to hit a shot like that where you're like a foot or two away, because you don't want to sink a hole in one with no witnesses.
No, right? You're right. And it's silly that thought went through my head. Like, as the ball's on its way, I'm like, God, do I want it to go in? Like, obviously it would have been great, but I'm not even sure it counts. Like, you need witnesses. I probably would have had to go grab somebody on a different hole and made him, tell him I hadn't gone and messed with the ball or anything. But, and then that's the other thing, I would take a hole in one, period. I've never had one. I played a ton of golf. I've never come particularly close. That might have been as close as I've come. But you'd also like to pure it. Like, there's some guys that get it when they kind of, skank it and it rolls up and it hits a tree or it hits the flag and drops in or whatever. You'd like to hit a great shot. And this wasn't a great shot, but like I said, I still would have taken it. But if it's going to happen, I'd rather more people be around.
No question. Well, those are 2 good enough shots to be your golf shots of the week, if nothing else. Scott, as always, a pleasure. Always enjoy the time, and we look forward to doing this again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Scott. Again, Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with BrownZone.com, the Chronicle Telegram, and the Medina Gazette. That's going to wrap things up here on the BrownZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll come back your way again next week.